Hello, I've just read Chapter 9 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. We finally met Hydra, and she's described very differently to how I imagined her before. So anyway, but we'll get to Hydra. So Ferrus is desperate for news. He's absolutely desperate for news about Ami's rescue, and he can't show that emotion among the Imperial officers with him. He thinks the operation to save Ami should be done by now. She should be back at the safe house with the 11, but he hasn't had the signal come through, and he thinks something must have gone wrong. And he's flown down into Galactic City, and into the atmosphere of Coruscant, and it feels so strange for him because, usually he's had to sneak his way in and out of Coruscant multiple times now, but now he has official clearance. He just isn't used to arriving on Coruscant so officially. And he winds up being ushered into a luxurious airspeed and then gets ushered to the Senate complex. And we learn that the Inquisitors have an office in the Senate. And he's brought there by an escort. And we're told that the Inquisitor's office are several levels down below Palpatine's office in the Senate Tower. And the sergeant leaves him at Hydra's store, and she waves her hand over the sensor for him before pivoting and marching off. And that's when Hydra's description comes in. And this is very different to how I thought she looked. How I was at least picturing her, and if I remember to, I'll bring up how I thought she looks on screen now. So, if I have brought it up, you've got to look at it, but she's described very differently. She's described as, I'll just read this off. A short, slender humanoid rose as Ferrus walked in. He couldn't tell if Hydra was male or female, but he guessed she was female. He couldn't guess at her own world. A hood covered her head, and she wore the enveloping dark maroon of the Inquisitor team, the colour that always reminded Ferrus of dark blood. Her eyes were a pale silver colour. She tipped back the hood, and her shiny skull shone through the light stubble of hair. Her voice was husky. Emperor Palpatine has directed me to be at your service. So that's a very different look. If I haven't put it in, I did an Inquisitor Morph video back in December. You can go and look at that. And Hydra should be like the second, third Inquisitor that pops up in that video. On the Legends part. So if you haven't seen that, then you can go and check that out and see what Hydra looks like in how I originally envisioned her. It's a very different look. Again, she says that Palpatine's directed her to be at Ferrus's service, and she explains that he's in charge of finding Force Adepts, and she says that they've made progress, and she has a list of possibles for him, and she says that you may use her data port, and she gestures toward a console, and she says that she's already entered her password. And Ferrus says he'd like to get started as soon as possible, and Hydra tells her to begin. Ferrus sits at the console, and the database has already been loaded, and he looks through it, and Hydra explains that you'll see them ranked through importance, and that number 1 is a tall human male, silver hair, large build, homeworld unknown, and that is of course Rygal. And this makes and we're told that he had slipped through in a stormtrooper trap only a week before, and this makes Ferrus feel better. As he'd actually tracked a Jedi, and he thinks that maybe this will prove valuable, and he thinks he can help Rygal and set the Empire off on the false trail that will allow Rygal a chance to disappear completely. And he goes through the list, and I'm sure some of these must be referenced in other Star Wars characters. It says that some of the reports look promising. A pilot in the mid-rim who made freight runs to the core and made several extraordinary escapes from Imperial tales. This is the one that this one that I'm about to read is the one that kind of clicks for me. And it says, a teacher who had single-handedly saved a school full of children from a sudden groundquake with such skill and speed that he has attracted attention. And for me, this guy clicks as Darren Arcanian, who is a Jedi who was first introduced in the 90s, alongside Corwin Shell, and he was the master of Corwin Shelvey, and he died against High Inquisitor Jermaine. And I'm fairly sure it was in Galaxy Guide 9. It was at one point established that he was Corwin Shelvey's tutor at a college, and that's how they met. I'm fairly sure that's what it was. So this is the one that kind of clicked for me. But we learn that he had saved that the teacher saved a school full of children from a sudden groundquake with such skill and speed that it attracted attention. There was a bounty hunter and an account of a toddler on Alderaan who seemed to have sensed danger before it happened and saved her minder, or guardian, whichever you want to say. And to Ferris, the Alderaanian sounds more like a coincidence, and he ranks it last. But we all know that's Leia, and we all know she is force sensitive. And the pilot, the teacher, and the bounty hunter sound promising to him, and he thinks that and he puts some, I guess, saw at the top, and he says, and the thought of any Jedi surviving is the first light of Rey in his life since Roan's death. He says he'll study this and get back to Hydra with priorities, and he says they're gonna need a starship with a hyperdrive, and Hydra says, already requisitioned. I will be accompanying you. And Ferris thinks, lucky me, Ferris thought. Hydra made the former head Inquisitor, Malorum, look like the life of the party. And we have a little time jump, and it says Hydra wants to leave immediately. So she's very much get down to business, I guess. But Ferris was able to put the trip off until the next day, claiming he needed to do additional research, and he thinks he's at last free of the Empire. And we're told that with his credentials, he's able to move freely through the Sonic Complex. It says he moves easily through the checkpoints of the Sonic Complex. And he reaches an entrance to MPOW and finds Mallory Lands there waiting for him in the reception area. And she's dressed in the white scrubs that the medical personnel wear, and Ferris goes, "Oh, looks like you got the job." And she says it wasn't hard, and tells him to follow her. And they go through quite a few. They go through quite a few corridors, and they reach a room that's Mark's radiation unit, and she hands Ferris some protective clothing, and he slips it on, and they go inside the room, and it's humming with machinery. And she explains, and there's a transparent steel chamber that's standing in the centre of the room. It's surrounded by data ports and screens, and she says that, and she explains, advanced therapy for post-surgical procedures. The machines in here are highly calibrated. Any surveillance equipment will cause fused circuits and severe breakdowns. This is the only place I know where it's safe to talk. Ferris asks if the entire place is under surveillance, and she says she doesn't think so, but the main areas are monitored, and this is just a precaution. This is the safest place. And she said there are surveillance. There's rumours of surveillance droids in the radiation unit. But they're supposedly there for security. And again, it's just a rumour, and she says there's apparently no such thing as a private conversation, and she thinks it's more likely that there are spies among them who get rewards for reporting back to the managers, and she says it's hard to tell so far. And she explains that most med centres are rumour mills, and she says it's no exception there. She even says there's a rumour about a ghost, and she can see why this place is creepy. And she says, I can see why this place is creepy. And that's when Ferris asks, can you give me access to the records, in the medical records? And she says that they're in luck, all the record offices are fully staffed during the day, so there's never really a chance to be there alone. But there's a technician on the night shift called Jacko, and he's going to be fired soon, he just doesn't know it. And he keeps getting partners, and they keep requesting to be moved, or they keep requesting to be transferred, or they'll quit. And she's experienced that she's friends with the employment director, and she told him that her cousin needs a job. And she says, so you're in, and she says that you can lie your way through with Jaco. He's not very bright, as she says. And Ferris asks if they can do it tonight, and she says, sure, just do her a favour, don't get caught. She says she doesn't mind helping Ferris, but she'd like to stay healthy. And Ferris looks at Mallory, and her gaze is just so much like Roan's, and he speaks the truth and tells her he won't let anything happen to her, and that he'd die first before he'd let anything happen to her. And she grins, and the flash of Roan hits Ferris again, and she says, "Just so I'm not second," which is a bit of a confusing line, but yeah. Not really a whole lot to talk about in this chapter. Again, the description of Hydra really threw me off. That really threw me off, because it's nothing like how I imagined her. It is a big deviation from how I imagined her. That's if she is female, because it's not really confirmed if she's female or not. It says, and it's using she, her, and it's saying. And Ferris presumes she's female, but he can't really tell. So that really puts a lot of mystery into her. Again, the description's very difficult, because I kind of imagined her with a black robe and kind of like some longer hair, but no, it's like she's almost bald, I guess, because it's just as a stubble of hair. And she's still wearing the red. She's just still wearing the maroon robes. Whereas I was imagining her wearing black robes. So yeah, it's quite an interesting thing. A big deviation from what I thought she would have looked like. A massive deviation. But so yeah. What else? Again, Sydra's very much interested in. She definitely seems like the type that would get down to business. She doesn't waste time. She's quite eager to start the trip. When Ferris isn't. He's taking his time. Hydra. She's getting a bit of ahead of herself. She wants to take the trip, whereas Ferris is taking a bit slower, trying to find out anything he can. Again, it's going to be curious to see why Ferris is trying to get into Empal. Is it so he can discover who Vader is? Is it just to discover how he can kind of defeat Vader? Like what weaknesses he has in his prosthetics? It's going to be interesting to see why he's wanting to get in there. So yeah. Again, I'm not really sure what else I have to say on this chapter. There's not really a lot to talk about. It's going to be interesting to see if that teacher gets brought up again. It definitely feels like it could be in reference to Darren Arcanian, but it also seems like it couldn't be. It's definitely one of those things where it's obscure enough to the point where it's not a massive confirmation. We kind of have to keep reading to see who it is. And, we've got Master of Deception and Reckoning to go yet. We've still got quite a bit to go before we properly get to what was it? You know what I mean. Before we finish the series. So yeah, but I think that brings an end to this review. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 10 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. I've struggled to get a lot of chapters in today. I've only been able to fit in 3, which is a bit low. at the moment for what I've been doing with this book. I've usually gone through quite a few in one go, but I've had a bit of a rough day, so I've only really been able to get from 8, 9, read 8, 9 and 10, and I'm kind of squeezing 10 in at the end. I don't think I can manage 11, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm officially halfway through the book now. I've read chapter 10. And there's, 20 chapters, was it? If I can get there. Yeah, 20. So, yeah. Anyway, we begin with a little bit of a lesson on the Usans that becomes a little bit relevant. And we're told that the Usans always get up before dark on work days, because they like to get off work late in the afternoon for what they refer to as the endless hour, which is pretty much because the light lasts for a long time late in the afternoon, and it's what they refer to as the endless hour rather than calling it twilight. Not to be confused with the Operation Twilight that the Empire is doing. And we're told that's when families crowded the cafes and children played in the parks. And we're told that's back in the time that every Usan could still remember before the Empire came. And we're told that before sunrise, everyone's crowding, of course, to get to work. They're crowding them at the airbuses, they're crowding the space lanes, they're crowding the walkways. And we're told that this crush is essential to Amianton's rescue. And all members of the 11 had spread the words to people even without jobs to get up early and crowd the city. So let's say create traffic, maybe create an accident or 2 or 3. But they have to be careful, because if they create too much, it will go suspicious, and they may have their children taken away again, and it has to look natural. And many are reluctant, particularly those whose children were only taken away, what we're told now, is a week ago. But Will was able to appeal to them and get them on board. And we told how Clive had heard of this, had heard of the legendary cooperation and loyalty of the Balarsan people, and how almost every citizen supported the 11, but he hadn't really believed it. He had been a bit cynical when he looks at it. And again, we're told about how no spies were recruited by the Empire, but he had to admit that he casts a cynical eye on the Balarsan resistance from a distance, because in his experience, beings could only be noble to an extent. As self-interest was always renounced, so he was stunned when pretty much everyone in Usa risked everything and took to the streets. And again, his job is to keep an eye on Anton, and the crush of traffic is just a perfect cover. Checkpoints are getting overwhelmed, and airspeeders and airbuses break down, and pedestrians are described as milling in small crowds, and the checkpoints are getting overwhelmed. The stormtroopers just can't handle the mass, and airspeeders and airbuses and stuff get through, and random grav sleds, and disappear into the chaos on the other side, or down alleys that run behind the twisting streets. And it gets to the point where the garrison has to send out more troops. But it was... Sorry, pardon me. But even then, it's still gonna take some time for them to get control of the city again. And we're reminded that Clive's job is to simply keep its army in sight and try to add to the chaos. And he starts off piloting an airspeeder, then abandons it to block a lane, and gets aboard the grav sled and takes it through the back alleys to keep Amy in sight. And is again aboard a different speeder, and her last ride is with Dona again. And this time she's in a utility skiff that the 11 have blast-proofed, which I just assume means maybe resistant to blasters, and it had been secretly tweaked to give it more speed and agility. All the while, more and more patrols are appealing, and the sky lanes are thicker and thicker with prowler vehicles, but they still can't get a lock on Ami's position just because of how much traffic there is and how many people there are. And they're almost to the last checkpoint, and we're told this is the tricky part, no question. And Clive knows Gowl and Solace are somewhere, he just can't see them. They were doing a good job at hiding, but he knows they must be somewhere close. And he's winds up going back to foot, and he's walking and he walks to the checkpoint, and he sees Donor ahead at the checkpoint, and there are several vehicles back in the line, and we're told that Will was assigned the job of creating the diversion. And he suddenly a garbage scow overturns, and it of course spews all its foul-smelling material onto the street, and airspeeders collide, and Airbuses let out their passengers, and people start rushing toward the checkpoint. And at the same time, it says Donor backed up her skiff, manoeuvred around the checkpoint, and then zoomed forwards, which is a bit it's a bit of a what bit of a strangely phrased sentence, but yeah. And we're told that she would have made it as far as Clive could tell. And that everything's gone according to plan, but they can't plan for everything. And they couldn't plan around the around an airspeeder full of stormtroopers that have been sent for reinforcements. And that airspeeder takes off after Donor. And Clive's on foot, he has to check in his ID docs, and once he's out of sight of the guards, he's able to sprint after Donor. And Donor eventually pulls over because she knows she's going to be blasted out the sky if she doesn't. And the stormtroopers come over to her, and she hands over her ID docs, and the stormtroopers order her out, and one of them starts recalling the information while the two others go to the back of the skiff. And Clive's stomach starts to twist as they take off the tarp, but luckily Ami's been hidden much better. It's been hidden much more better than that. There's a bunch of stuff in the skiff, and they start examining the various items. And Clive is just deciding his next move when Flame comes out of nowhere, and she shoots the guy piloting the Imperial airspeeder. It doesn't kill him, but it stuns him. And then Flame emerges from the crowd in a flying leap, as it says, and she boots the stormtrooper out of the. It says she booted the stormtrooper out of the seat and swung herself in. The airspeeder shot forward, ploughing down the two stormtroopers who were inspecting the back of the skiff. As the first stormtrooper reached for his blaster, Flame vaulted over the back bed of the skiff and into the pilot's seat. Donor jumped back aboard, and the skiff took off. And we're told that the blast of fire streaked through the air, and the pedestrians just flattened themselves to the roadway. And when Clive can now see Rygal and Sus, who are hiding behind a pile-up of speeders and deflecting blast of fire with their lightsabers where and when they can. And the stormtroopers race for their airspeeder, and they ignore the injured comrade in there. No stunned comrade. And this is Clive's chance. This is Clive's moment. But he also knows that the next move for the Jedi will be to engage the stormtroopers directly. He thinks he will probably be through one of those force-assisted leaps, and that would no doubt expose them to all, and target them for a full-scale, and they'll be the target for a full-scale hunt. But he reaches to his utility belt and withdraws two small objects. It's a dried plum fruit, strips, and a little synth plaster. And he throws it into the exhaust of the airspeeder. And the stormtroopers try chasing after Donor, and the engine starts up and then dies. They start it up again and it dies. And at that point, Flame and Donor are well away. And Clive reverses direction and then strolls down an intersection boulevard, and he thinks it's amazing what that fruit and synth plaster can do. And he thinks bounce it into an exhaust. It says bounce it right into an exhaust and clog it just enough to stop an airspeeder from its needed acceleration boost. Who needed a blaster when you had good tools? As if the fruit and synth plaster's good tools, but for Clive it is. And once they're back at the safe, once Stoner and Amy and Flame are back at the safe house, and Will apparently, Donor gets Flame in there and she explains how she's hurt, Flame's hurt, and the 11 are rushing to ask Amy questions, and she says to stay back, she's fine, and someone needs to get her the med kit. And they all watch as Flames lower to the floor, and she puts her head back and closes her eyes. And again, something starts itching in Clive again, and he thinks that he's seen her before. And that was, again, something, I think it was in last book, where he's seen her before, and he just couldn't quite pinpoint where. And Amy puts on the Baxter and painkillers, and she says it's not bad and that she'll be feeling better in a minute or two. And Flame nods, biting her lip, and only now does Amy allow Will to approach her, and they embrace. And Will says that they owe Flame a debt, and Flame, without opening her eyes, just asks if they trust her now, and Amy says that yes, they do trust her. But Clive isn't sure. He's not sure at all. And we're told he has an itch, and when he has an itch, he has to scratch it. And, sorry about that. Anyway. He's got something's itching inside him. Something's getting to him. He's sceptical of Flame. And he knows he can't get rid of this feeling until he did some digging. And we're told how Toma had been the one to bring Flame to their attention, and he had known her back on their shared homeworld of Echoing. And Clive sighs, and we're told the last thing he wants to do is take a side ship to a planet he heard was in the middle of a civil war. But it looks like that's where he was going to be going, and that's where we end off the chapter. Again, this really just shows the loyalty of the Balarsons, and you see why the 11 is so looked upon, praised and looked upon by the galaxy as resistors. You really see why. And we've had this before, we had it back in Desperate Mission, where everyone had dressed as prisoners to hide the other prisoners that were about to be executed, and they enveloped the officers so that the stormtroopers couldn't even shoot. But we get to see it on a less personal scale for them here. You get to see it on a much less personal scale for them here. It's not just for their families. This is just most of them, some random person. Just some random person. And who's just so happens to be a member of the 11, and they're doing it for them. And it really just shows their loyalty. So, yeah. I really hope it turns out Toma isn't a betrayer. I really hope that's not the case, because it seems like it's going to be that way, though. It seems like it's going to be that way. I really do not want it to be that. For Flame, again, I assume Flame is, but Toma, I really just hope it's not. Again, I can't see it for Toma. I can't see it, at least with him being a member of the Empire. Maybe a criminal organisation, but definitely not the Empire. I cannot see it for the Empire. Not one bit. So, yeah. The next chapter is again focusing on Ferrus. And he's helping, I think he's trying to find those medical records next chapter. I don't think I don't think Hydra is featured in that chapter. Oh, it's quite a short chapter, maybe I will read it. Well, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he finds, if he does find anything. But yeah, I'm not sure if I have anything else to say on this chapter. Again, a lot of it was just rescuing Gammy. You know, that's pretty much how it can be summarised. This is one of those chapters where you just can't say a lot on. But yeah. Anyway, I think this brings the review to an end. This was quite a at times a little bit confusing, but like with Jonah making their reverse manoeuvre, but hey, you know. But yeah, anyway. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone. I have just read chapter 11 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. So it's quite a short chapter, this. So Ferrus, he's got the job at some Empire. Also, I didn't read chapter 11 last night. Like I said, I might read it. I didn't, so I put it off till today. But anyway, Ferrus is making his way into Empire with the rest of the workers for the night shift. And no one's giving him a second glance, and he's following Mallory's description as he makes his way through the hallways to the door marked Information Centre. And he swipes his card, and the sensor clicks, and he's relieved. And Mallory had promised she could enable him to enter, and she'd come through. And we also are told that he has now finally received the all-clear codes from Will, meaning that Amy is safe. And you only hope that the Imperial Governor wouldn't retaliate. And we're told that here on the night shift, there wasn't much to do for the infotech workers, so it was very lightly staffed. It was just lightly staffed. And a doctor or med trainee might call on them to enter a patient, but we're told that Empire no longer has an emergency unit that takes in all correspondence systems in need of care, and instead they're emitted by physicians, and the high costs pretty much limit those who can attend to senators and rich corporate people who clog Imperial City. Or Galactic City, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, Ferrus makes his way, I guess, to an office, or is somewhere in the information centre. I think that's what it was, wasn't it? And it says, a plump young man sat at the console, crunching his way through a meal of root chips and a pressed protein slider. And he says hello to Ferrus, and Ferrus sits in the other chair, and he introduces himself as Ty Ambler. And the young man introduces himself as Jaco Hall-Lesser, and he just says to just call him Jaco. And he says, you just looked into the sweetest shop at Empire, buddy. Not much doing here. And Ferrus replies saying, suits me. I'm allergic to hard work. And Jaco chuckles, and he says, second that. And he offers Ferrus some of his root chips, and Ferrus says no, and he needs to familiarise himself with the system, and Jaco tells him not to go crazy because they take it easy in this department. And Ferrus begins looking through the database and flips through it in a seemingly casual way, and he looks specifically for records towards the end of the Clone Wars, which is around the time Vader first surfaced. And we're told Jaco is continuing crunching his meal beside Ferrus, and is watching a pod race on his vid screen. And Ferrus is searching through the material, and nothing's popping out at him. And we're told how Empire have been changing over from its old role as a medical centre open to all to an exclusive meds facility and a biomechanical reconstruction centre. and can find no records of extraordinary procedures or evidence for cover-up, but he's not expecting it to find it that easily. And Draco finishes his meal, and he pushes his chair back and puts his feet up on the console and crosses his arms. And Ferris hopes he'd go to sleep, because the next step is to go deeper into the system and look for security codes he could break. But then again, the security codes might set off an alarm that would alert Draco. That Draco could see from his position. And Draco says to him, "Listen, new guy, I'm going to take a snooze. Don't wake me up don't wake me up if work calls, and don't be scared of the ghosts." And Ferris is relieved a little bit as Draco's eyes close, but something starts to get at Ferris. Again, the ghost. It's been mentioned again. There was Mallory mentioned the rumour of the ghost. Now Draco's mentioned the ghost, and he asks what the ghost is. And Draco opens his eyes, and he's surprisingly not annoyed. And he says it happened about a year ago. And he explains that it was near the end of the Clone Wars. A scream was heard a scream was heard, and a scream that was so terrible and so loud it echoed through the building and made sensors go crazy, and that it damaged the hearing of one of the meds workers permanently. And everyone and the meds workers tried to find the source of the sounds, but there was nothing. And there was only a handful of patients there at the time, and it seemed to have come from everywhere and nowhere, but no patient had done it. And he lowers his voice even further, and he says it was as though all the dead of the Clone Wars had screamed their death cries at the same time, then come back to being dead. And Ferris knows that Draco's just trying to spook him, but it works, just not in the way JK was intending. And Draco winks at Ferris and says enjoys the night shift, and he falls asleep in seconds. And Ferris thinks about Vader again. He thinks about Vader, and he thinks about how his cybernetics, how his prosthetics are extensive. They're from breath mask to vision enhancement, and he thinks there's even possible artificial limbs. And he's fairly certain that Vader has at least one artificial hand. And it looks like he's regulated by what seems to be a complex biosystem within the suit. Ferris, for the first time, wonders what awful injuries he must have had to go through to have to get all of that installed. And he thinks Harry's been chasing the wrong idea, and Vader must have been in terrible pain. And he turns back to the console, and he stops searching the records he was searching, because he knows he's not going to find anything there. Instead, he looks at the blueprints of the building for some reason, and the words everywhere and nowhere go back in his mind, and his instincts kick in, and he knows he's right. And it's somewhere in this building Darth Vader had been born. That's the last line, and that's the chapter. You really get to see why Jaco is going to be fired soon. He literally just says, "Don't wake me up if work calls." To be fair, there's not a lot of work there, but Mallory said he's going to be fired soon. He just doesn't know. You really see why. Jaco seems very pleasant. I'm going to say that. Jaco seems very pleasant. He seems like a good guy. What else is there to talk about in this chapter? I'm not sure if I have anything else to say about this chapter, really, because it's just like Ferris meets Jaco, does some search in the records, and we're told about the ghosts, and then Ferris changes how he's searching the records, and that's pretty much what this chapter is. So it does make it a little bit difficult to try and think of anything. What can we talk about with this then? What what can we talk about? Again, it's interesting how, I guess there's... I'm not sure if that's really... No, I'm not sure about that. I was just thinking about... Ferris seems to have very good instincts, but... it kind of reminds me of Malorum a bit. But you know, whereas Malorum's constantly right, I can't remember if Ferris has mostly right instincts a lot of the time. So I'm not sure if I can really comment on that. I do wonder if the ghosts, again it says it was around the end of the Clone Wars, I do wonder if the ghost was actually the screams that Anakin was making when he was, you know, when he was getting put into the suit, you know. I wonder if those were the screams that everyone was hearing. And of course we all know that at the end there was the incredibly piercing scream where he goes, "No!" So I wonder if that's what the scream they were listening to is what they were talking about. Whether that was the ghost that they were talking about. I have a feeling it is. I have a feeling that it is. But we'll have to wait and see. What's the next chapter about? Okay, so it's going back to Sano Solo. We missed Sano Solo out for quite a few books, haven't we? Let's say quite a few books, you know, we missed him out on last book. So it's nice to see that he's coming back again, you know. And no, we didn't miss him out last book, you know, he was on the call, but he didn't have much going on. We missed him out in Return of the Dark Side. So yeah, anyway, I think that brings an end to this review. So yeah, thank you all for watching and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 12 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. So, we're back with Sano Solo at last. It's took us quite a while to get to him, but we're back with him now. And we're told about how his career might be ruined, but it's not over yet. And we're told that if senators and functionaries thought he'd just go away, then he had another thing coming, and we're told he'd been close to power and he would be close to it again. And we're told that he had lost his office in the Senate, and that had gone to some governor or Senate, no, had gone to another senator of some big core system who was rolled over for the Empire and needed to be thanked. And Solo's stuck in a tiny office in the new Imperial Naval Building, and we're told that his job is to oversee the new Naval Academy, and he just thinks one school in comparison to whole systems. And we're told, to make matters worse, some of those who rank below him, like Bogdavinian, who are absolute fools who couldn't make a decision on their own, are now Imperial governors, and above, and worse, that ranks above him now, because he's technically not a senator apparently, even though it says, I think it was in Return of the Dark Side, that he was still a senator, because Palpatine would need, because he still would vote for whatever Palpatine wanted. So it's confusing me. It's confusing me, Senator Solo's position. But now they're Imperial governors, and they're wielding and it says they're wielding power without knowing what to do with it. And Solo coughs into his handkerchief, and we're told that the anger inside him is just giving him trouble. And he thinks so he has to get out of this out of just being in the naval building. He has to rise again, and it says wreak vengeance on those who have crossed him, or worse, patronise him. And his assistant, who was given to him by the Imperial Administration Office, comes in, and he looks nervous, and we're told he's a very stupid person. And he says, "A communication for you, Lord Solo. I'm not a lord. Call me Senator Solo. But you're not a senator anymore. It doesn't matter. I still have the title. Senator Solo, a communication for you. Who is it? I'm busy. Lord Vader. He's a lord, isn't he? You left Lord Vader waiting. Put him through my private hollow line immediately, you idiot. So that kind of just demonstrates how Solo, he still wants to be called a senator, even though he's not a senator anymore. And you think so, he's surrounded by fools. But then he starts speaking with Vader. And Vader asks him about... He tells him that he's working on a project that's on a need-to-know basis. And he needs a recruit from the Naval Academy to volunteer. And Solo asks if there's any requirements, and Vader says that... and he lists a few off, such as... top of their class, or sons and daughters of those in favour, and Vader says, no, avoid those, and avoid any children of senators, anyone who might ask questions. And he tells him discretion is the key, and he should look for some hungry recruits, someone who is desperate to rise, and they will start with one recruit and move on if they need to. Solo's about to ask if he can know what the project is, and Vader says no. And he tells him to just send him a student. And without another word, the hologram fades, and Solo's thinking, how is he supposed to do this? Because he didn't get involved with the recruits. He couldn't even name one. And he thinks he's had to rely on his second-in-command, which we learn is Maggis. Maggis is the second-in-command of the Naval Academy. Only below Solo, of course. And Solo smiles, because to him this is all still good news, and he's thinking at last a favour his career might just be able to make a turnaround. The turnaround is about to begin. And he drums his fingers on his desk and thinks, what can he use, and if he thinks he can make this even sweeter by getting payback at the same time. And he thinks, isn't Lune involved in the academy? Didn't Bog enroll him into the academy? And he thinks that and it says, it was clear to Solo that whatever this project was, it was not something you'd want your child involved in. And that would be tasty revenge. And we're told how Vader told him that the recruit should have a low profile, and he couldn't ignore that direct order, but he thinks if Bog volunteered his son, that would be different. And he just can't be, but Bog just can't know. He's being intentionally steered into doing it. And for Solo, this doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem, because he knows how to get Bog into something. It's make him feel excluded. And he gets in, and he turns on his comm link, and he knows it, and he tells Magus it's time to speak with Bog. And a little bit later, Bog makes his way to Magus's office, and Bog asks how Lune is doing, and Magus says that he's doing well enough, and there's always an adjustment period, and since he told him that his mother was not in agreement about his training, he assumes it will take a little time for him to settle in. And Bog says he wouldn't assume that, and he's a bit annoyed by the notion of him taking time to settle in, and he says he's a good boy, a smart boy, takes directions well, at least when his mother isn't around. Talk about a bad influence! And he's a bad influence! And he laughs, but Magus doesn't join him. And we're told how Bog just can't imagine how Magus got this job, because he seems to break Imperial code, he seems to be lazy, he seems to be out of shape, and those are two traits that Bog doesn't imagine will be tolerated by the Imperial code, yet he's here. And he thinks that maybe Solo likes to put incompetence in positions underneath him to make himself look better. And the thing is, that's sort of true, but not really. But it's funny because he was beneath Solo at one time. Solo was his mentor. So he's kind of calling himself himself incompetent in that, through that logic. And we're told that this is also the only beginning of the Empire. And it's lots of people jockeying for power. And we're told the cream would rise to the top just as he did. And the lights up on Magus's console. He says he has to take this, and Bog is annoyed because it's the nerve of the guys taking a call while I'm here, while I'm a governor here. And you think it's probably just some whiny parent wanting to get into contact. And he says, oh, it's Senator... And the Maggie says, it's Senator Sordo. And Bog says, oh, Sano is a buddy of mine. I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I listened in. And Maggis can't do anything as Bog turns it onto hollow mode, because into hollow form, because again he's an Imperial governor, he can't do anything. He says, hey, surprise, old friend, it's me. Good to see you. Been meaning to contact you. I just got into Imperial City today. And he's been there a week. And Sordo asks where Maggis is, and Maggis moves forward and says, here, sir. And Sordo hesitates a bit. He hesitates a bit because... And Bog knows Sordo doesn't want him to remain, but he can't ask him to leave because Bog now outranks him. And he finds this funny. He finds this amusing. And his former mentor's discomfort. He finds that amusing. And he says, "Go ahead, Sano Mano. Maybe I can help." And but of course, Solo is a bit more crafty than that. You know, I think to him, this is an intentional thing from Solo. He wanted to get Bog into the room and make it seem like he's talking to Magus. You know, Solo is quite a clever guy. He's a clever guy. And you can say that that he's intentionally got Bog there. And he starts saying to Magus that he needs a recruit to volunteer for a special project. And says that they should have and that they should be both intelligent and have unquestioning loyalty to the Empire. And he says, therefore, no new recruits. This comes straight from Lord Vader's office, so give it top priority. And Magus asks what the nature of the project is, and Solo explains it's on a need-to-know basis. And he wants the name tonight. And Magus says that you have to get parental permissions, and Solo tells him there's no time, just to follow his instructions. And Bog says, sounds like you got your tail whipped there, young fellow. And Magus, unlike Magus, Bog is feeling exhilarated. He's thinking, Vader, what luck. And he can't imagine just how many political points he'd score by getting Lune into the programme. So he says, I'm going to help you out here, Magus, enlist Lune into the project. You couldn't ask for a better kid, smart, follows orders, loyal. And Solo says he's very young and he's only just arrived, so Senator Solo specified older recruits. And Bog says, not really, you've got to learn to listen carefully. He said unquestioning loyalty to the Empire. Now that's a different thing, that's what my boy has. And Magus says he doesn't know if he characterised his son that way, as having unquestioning loyalty. And Bog says that he would characterise him that way, his special boy. And he says, I think he would want to succeed with this one, pleasing Lord Vader shouldn't take that lightly. And he says he'd be talking with Sorrow too, telling him how helpful Magus was, and he's sure he'd want him to, and he says, I'm sure you want to succeed in the job. We all want to see you succeed. You have such a bright future ahead of you. And I'll just read off the last couple lines. Magus moved the Jewish sheets from one corner of his desk to another. Bog wasn't concerned with his reluctance. He would cave. Loyalty. That's what the Empire was all about. Those who practiced it would receive their rewards. Magus knew that. Magus cleared his throat. Governor Davinian, I'll recommend your son for the project, of course. And that's where the chapter ends. Solo is quite crafty. I think you can kind of tell he set Bog up there. He set Bog up to be meeting with Magus, So it could be like he was invading. He thinks he's invading a private call, but in reality, that's what Soro intended to do. You know, he's quite crafty that way. It's going to be interesting to see what Vader has to say about this. I have a feeling he's going to be... I says no children's senators. You know, I guess Bog is somewhat close, so I'd say he's probably close enough to come under the no children of senators rule. I know he's a governor, but you know, I think what Vader's saying, you know, I think it means that kind of can be put into a more general sense, you know, and I think Lune would come under that. So it's going to be interesting to see what Vader would say at that. Bog has so much confidence in Lune. He has so much confidence in Lune. It's ridiculous how he doesn't really know what his son is like. It's a bit too... He has a bit too much confidence in him. And it is funny how he says, "Oh, Sora must be putting people under him, people who are incompetent beneath him to make himself look better," when he was once beneath Solo. So yeah. Yeah, this is going to be... I forgot about Vader wanting recruits. I forgot about that, but yeah, I guess we're starting off with the recruits now. With the Vader plot line. So yeah. Anyway, I think that brings an end to this chapter review. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 13 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. This is a bit of a difficult chapter to get through because of distractions and noises and stuff, which, if you've read a book, then you've probably more than likely have come across the frustrations of trying to read in silence and noises keep going on. But Clive has made his way to Acheron, and we're giving a bit of an update as to what's been going on in Acheron. The whole place is absolutely devastated. And we're told it's been blasted back to pre-tech times, and that the infrastructure has been blown to bits, and our citizens living in rubble. It's really been through it since we were last here in Dark Warning. And we're told that, and we were given a bit of, and again we were reminded of the history of Acheron, how when the Clone Wars began, they sided with the Separatists and were protected by them, by an orbiting team of battleships from the Trade Federation, because they were too precious, because their industries were too precious to lose. But a growing movement on Acheron decided to side with the Republic, and after the wars ended, opposition to the Empire was again fierce and vocal, and so they started again going against the Empire, and even the Separatist supporters went against the Empire, and especially after the Imperial troops arrived and established garrisons and took over major industries, and that was even when the Separatist supporters joined. And we're told now the Acherons fought fiercely and were defeated. And we're given a bit of history as to what had happened after Dark Warning, and after the Empire took over. And we're told that while they were under Imperial control, a civil war broke out between the long-standing rival factions that were, of course, the ancient city of Eluthan. The factions were concentrated in two cities: the ancient city of Eluthan and the larger, more, as it says, more cosmopolitan business centre of Sood. And then we're told the Imperials had closed their garrisons and moved their factories off planet. And all the factories off planet. And as Acheron was just no longer any use to them, and so they left the planet without law or government or a power grid. And so any devastation there is just being ground into dust by the Acherons themselves. because of their civil war. And again, we told how when Clive had been on the asteroid base, he talked to Toma and Rayna, and they had told him about how great Acheron was, how beautiful that it had been. And we're told he'd known about their lives before the Empire had invaded Acheron, and he knows what Acheron had been. And he sees now just how beings could be truly beaten and broken, and how they'd have they'd have to rebuild a civilization from scratch without the resources to do it, and the fighting between the two factions is stopping any progress because they're trying to fight for control. And again, besides, on his flight, he had been able to Acheron, he'd been able to reach Toma and communicate with him. He had to try again and again because, again, they have to be very careful because it is a bit difficult to get into contact there. And when he did get into contact, they had to keep it brief because they didn't want the communications to get intercepted. But Toma had managed to give him a little bit of a lead that he needed. And again, we're told that Toma had known Flame in the underground, so he'd only known her code name, which is of course Flame, and that she'd surfaced after the Empire had arrived. And again, we were reminded that Toma was the commander of the Acheron resistance, and he hasn't had much direct contact with Flame, but it says but a trusted friend had reached him on a secret comm account he had set up and told him that a former comrade needed his help, and the blockade of the planet at that point had ended, and now the blockade of the planet has ended now, and again because the Empire's abandoned it, and Clive's able to land on Acheron, and he makes his way through and he lands on the outskirts of Lune, and he makes his way through the city, and he just sees how devastated it is, and he knows seeing this will break the hearts of Toma and Rayna. And eventually he finds the street he's looking for, and he sees a slender woman sitting down on a half-destroyed stairs. And Clive says good evening, and she just goes, an optimist. And we're told about Acheron politeness and hospitality, how you only use first names, you never call someone by their full name. On Acheron, it's considered insulting to use someone's full name, even if it's a stranger. And he hopes that the hospitality of the Acherons still holds up now. And he says he's looking for Vira, Vira, and the woman asks who's asking, and Clive says it's Clive, and Toma sent him. And this gets the woman's attention, and she says, Toma, so he is alive. And he says, and Clive says that Toma's alive and well, and sending his regards to Vera. And not to be confused with the detective Vera. But you never know, it may be, because it does say, as the woman then says, I'm sorry, there's no way to say this easily. Vera was killed in the fighting. She lived with us. I was her sister-in-law. And again, Clive thinks he's come to a dead end. And he sees the disappointment, and the woman sees the disappointment on his face. But she says maybe her husband, who was of course Vera's brother, could maybe help Clive. And we're told that he was a good friend, and we're told that her husband, who was called Alder, he was good friends with Toma too. And the woman introduces herself as Hallie, and she requests Clive to come inside. And they make their way in, and she says that they don't have much, but they'll gladly share. And Alder makes his way over. Before he does come over, Clive asks why they're staying here, and he asks if there's restriction on emigration, and Hallie says that there isn't, but if they don't rebuild their home planet, who will? The Empire? And she thinks, then what kind of home world do they have then if the Empire did it? But then Alder appears, and Hallie explains who Clive is, and that Toma told him to send him to Vera. And asks where Toma is, and of course Clive says he can't tell him, but Toma's doing well. And he says that thank the moons and stars and loss is a part of their lives here now, and he gives a little, I guess it's a Nakaran custom, as he says, may Vera rest with the ancients. And he says, so it's good to hear that Toma is well. And he offers him to sit down. And he says it's almost time for the evening meal. And Clive, he gets out his what was it? He puts his utility pack on the table and he says, let the visitors supply the meal. It's a custom of my world. And it's not really true. It's not a custom of the people of Bella Silver, which is where he comes from. But it's not true, but he has a feeling that they wouldn't accept otherwise. And Harry says he honours them with his gift. And he puts down the food, and Aldo is absolutely surprised. He's, oh, it's a feast, he says. And Clive says that they should eat first, and then they can talk. And so they start eating, and he pours them some drinks once Clive is sure they've had enough. And that's when they begin discussing. And he says that Soma could tell him about that. Soma told him that Vera could tell him about Flame. And he explains that Flame had contacted her and asked for a way to find Toma. He says, Toma told me that Vera could tell me about Flame. Flame contacted her and asked for a way to find Toma. And Alder says that Vera hadn't told them, and that she kept Flame's secret well. And Hanny explains they knew Flame, and she says, well, not before she joined the Resistance. She didn't live in the old city. We told that she was from the capital of Sood, and she said she came from a wealthy family but didn't share much information about. But they said they didn't share much information about their personal lives. And Clive asks if they know what her real identity is, and they shake their heads. And Alder says that you could tell she came from a family of wealth. You could tell she came from wealth. But as he says, but she never put on airs. She never asked for favours. She wasn't a principal player. But she did surveillance, set up safe houses, things like that. She took the same risks we all did. And Hallie says that she was smart and good, and there were rumours that she smuggled much of her wealth off the planet, and for a lot of Acherons, they resented Flame for that, but she just laughed in their face, as she knew she would need wealth to fight the Empire. And she felt she would only be able to fight if she had the wealth to do it. And the Eluthans, not the Acherons, the Eluthans thought it showed a lack of loyalty when she smuggled her wealth off the planet. Of course, she didn't care. Alder then explains that at one point she was caught by the Empire and imprisoned at the garrison, and she managed to escape, and she rescued 5 members of the Underground, which I assume was like an resistance movement on Acheron. And it says that she rescued 5 members of the Underground, and one of them was killed, but she got the others out. And Alder says one of them was Vera, and I think I was the one who, and either Vera was killed there, or she wasn't. And Clive feels a bit sheepish because it turns out his suspicions, at least to Clive now, seem like they were wrong. Flame was a hero. She was trustworthy. And he feels like it's wasted his time and should have been back at some Coruscant helping Astri rescue Lune. But something's still getting at him. He still recognises Flame from somewhere, but something's still getting at him. And he's wondering why he doesn't feel better, even though everything checks out. And Clive explains that Flame told Toma that her family owns some of the biggest factories in Acheron, and she does seem to have and her funds do seem enormous. And he says that there couldn't have been that many family-owned industries, and he asks if there's a database he can check. And Alder says no, their records all their records have been destroyed. And Hanny starts saying something and then breaks off. And Clive urges her on, and she explains that Flame had been a good pilot, and if they had a job that requires flying, they gave it to Flame. And Clive nods because again he knows this about Flame. She's a good pilot. He knows that, and he says, and Hallie continues saying, and once she's mentioned to me that her father had died right before she came to us, her grief was fresh. Yarrow Industries was a big manufacturer of luxury airspeeders and cruisers. Evan Yarrow died of natural causes shortly after the Empire took over his business. I know he had an adult daughter, Eve. I would imagine that a daughter raised in that industry would be an exceptional pilot. And again, Clive gets a bell starts ringing in Clive. He recognises Yarrow Industries, but he just can't place it where, just like how he can't place where he's seen Flame before. He's wondering why he can't remember. And Hallie continues saying most of their sales were confined to this system, referring to Yarrow Industries. And she says that most of their sales, as in Yarrow Industries, were confined to this system, but they were trying to break into galactic sales. Like most of the corporations, they started with the Separatists. They wanted the support of the Trade Federation and the commerce and banking clans. I remember that Evan Yarrow kept an apartment in Galactic City on Coruscant, so he could lobby the Senate. And Clive asks if Evan was married, and she says no, and that she remembers, and she says that his wife died when Eve was young, and that she read an article about how he had fathered Eve alone, and how she was impressed with that, and that he took her everywhere with him, whether it was factories or trade shows or the Senate, even though she was a young girl then. And she says, I think there was a hollow image, but I don't remember it clearly. And Clive asks, well, wouldn't someone recognise her then? And Alder says that not really. Luthen didn't travel much to Sood. No, Alder says not really, the Luthens don't travel much to Sood, and Hallie continues saying that she doesn't know anything else about Eve, and explains that their Hollow News industry and the information infrastructure collapsed around the time Flame joined them. And they didn't ask anybody too many questions at that time, and she says that, I know the Empire eventually moved Yarrow Industries off planet. I'm probably wrong about Eve. And Alder starts to ask why Clive is wanting to know. And Clive says that he needs to find out if Flame is trustworthy and that lives depend on it. And Alder says that they trust her with their lives, and they did. And Clive nods, and again, it makes sense, but the itch is still there. And he starts thinking about Hallie's quiet resolve to stay and rebuild her homeworld, about the other citizens sticking it out trying to rebuild with the bits of plastoid and tarps they have, and he wonders why Flame had left, and why she decided that she would be able to single-handedly create a galaxy-wide resistance movement. And he wonders if Flame could be Eve Yarrow, and if that it was true if that was true, she would have travelled the galaxy with her father. It recalls, and he starts recalling a line of dialogue from Flame from the last book, Secret Weapon, where she says that she has never been to Coruscant before. She doesn't much. I think it was the last book, where she says she hasn't been to Coruscant before. She doesn't like crowded planets, and to Clive, this would make sense if she was lying, because a resistors often lie about their past. Where it says where they never told the truth about where they've been or what they've done. It says, and he thinks how she calls it Imperial City though, the city on Coruscant. She calls it Imperial City, not Galactic City, like most resistance fighters did. At least when they're with other resistance fighters, but every member of resistances still calls it by what they considered its rightful name, Galactic City, even though Palpatine renames it Imperial City, and that bothers him, that she calls it Imperial City, but it wasn't much to go on for Clive, of course. And Clive asks if he can talk to the people from the garrisons, and Alder says no, there's only one that he can talk to, because the others have either been killed or arrested, and that's Warlin. But he's not sure if he'll even be able to, if they can even meet with Warlin anytime soon. But he says he can contact them, and we're told that, and Hallie says he goes to Sood undercover fairly often, and his daughter is married to a Sood, so he travels to see her, and it's very dangerous, but she's his only family. And Alder takes out his comlink and starts speaking with Clive, not with Clive, with Warlin, and Warlin says to come and meet him at dawn tomorrow, and Clive says he'd like to come tonight, and Warlin says no, he can't do tonight, he's busy travelling, but Alder can lead him to his home at dawn tomorrow. And there's a burst of static, and Clive doesn't hear him, and he asks what he said, and he says, I have been waiting for this, something about that day always bothered me. And the communication ends, and Clive's a bit frustrated, and he hands it back to Alder, and he has to wait till tomorrow, and he knows he won't be able to sleep much, and he doesn't. But eventually, come dawn, before even the sun rises actually, Alder and Clive set out over to Warlin's house. And it's surprisingly intact. Alder knocks on the door to Warlin's home. Nothing, no reply. And Alder says maybe he was delayed, and Clive says maybe, and he pushes the door a bit, and he feels something in the way. He pushes it further, and he sees arms and legs, and then he sees a body, with one arm outflung. And Clive asks if that's Warlin, and Alder says yes, and that he was a good friend, and he says to rest with the agents. He says, rest with the agents, my good friends, and Alder looks up at Clive with a bit of anguish on his face, and he says, this is what happens to us Acherons fighting Acherons, that many people thought he was a spy just because he risked going to his daughter too many times, and that's probably what they killed him for. And he says that they killed him for that. And Clive wonders if that was why he was killed. It says he wants to howl his frustration, but he'd never know. He'd never know if that was the case. And that's where we end the chapter. It really is sending Clive nuts, this whole thing about Flame. And the Flame mystery is getting quite good. I did actually look back at Return of the Dark Side, which I didn't mention this before, but for some reason I forgot about it. I think it was back in Secret Weapon, actually, I was meant to say this. But yeah, the text for 7 to 10 is definitely smaller. It's definitely smaller in 7 to 10. So I just want to make that clear for anyone who wants to get these books. But anyway, again, I quite enjoy this chapter. It's interesting about the Eve Yarrow thing. It's interesting about that. And Clive does bring up a good point of if people... It wouldn't just be, it wouldn't just be the Acherons who saw it. It would be the, what was it? It would be the, not just the Acherons, the whole galaxy, if they saw Eve on the hologram, wouldn't have they recognised her? At least one person, even just resistance movements, wouldn't they have recognised her from that hologram? Again, she is said to have been a young girl at that time, of course, but, we don't quite know if she was, still, if her father was still dragging her everywhere, even though she was an adult at that time. It's cute, it does feel like it wouldn't, at least someone have picked up on that. So you can kind of see where Clive's coming from with that, but also maybe no one has picked up on it. And that kind of brings in the question of what's Flame really doing with this, Again, for Toma, I'm struggling to see the the motive of working for the Empire for Toma. You know, he's just so renowned on Acheron, and he's seems so connected to his world back in top when I can't see him being a spy for the Empire. But Flame, I can kind of understand why, you know, because I can kind of see why she would be a spy for the Empire. And then she was captured by the Imperials, so yeah, that kind of throws it off a bit. But you know, you can kind of see why she is. What was it? Why she will be a spy? Because, you know, connecting resistance movements. She's finding out where all these resistance movements are. And if she's working for the Empire, she can then expose where each resistance movement is to the Empire and allow them to take them out in one big swoop. So that's quite a big ooh moment. So yeah. What else? I'm gonna talk about. Again, with the last book, I was actually going back to check it, checking, not the last book, I went back to check on Return of the Dark Side, to look at Toma's conversation with, Flame, what he said about his conversation with Flame, was at some point it said that Toma had contacted Flame. You know, at some point in one of the either Return of the Dark Side or last book, that it said Toma had contacted Flame. But I think it was Ferrus who said it in Return of the Dark Side when he was talking with Trevor, when Trevor was explaining who Flame is and what she's about to Ferrus about her wanting to get involved with the Somalian resistance, and saying how Ferrus says, "You said Toma got in contact with this Flame," or something like that, but in actuality it seems like Flame got in contact with Toma. You know, it seems like it's the other way around when I read that conversation. Of course, it could just be Trevor and Ferrus forgetting, you know. But, yes, this is really getting complicated with Flame. It's very interesting to see where this will go. What else? Again, you also get to kind of see a bit more of the grounded stuff. You know, like how Hallie and all that, they don't have much, and when they see the feast that Clive brings out, you know, their eyes widen. And Clive, despite even says that his own world of Better Silver is something he doesn't like staying on one planet. And how he prefers to go from one planet to another, and how many people said his home world of Bella Silver was beautiful. He just couldn't see it. He says he didn't have one bone of sentiment in him, but you can't get to see a little bit of that kind gesture, even if it is more out of getting their trust and getting them to talk, really. But you know, you kind of see it from him, and so it is quite a bit of a sweet thing. So yeah. I think that probably brings an end to this review. So yeah. Thank you all for watching. You know what I'm gonna say. Goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 14 and the last of the Jedi against the Empire. So Trevor's waited until all the lights are out, until it's night. All according to plan. What did Lune say to him specifically? I'm actually curious, trying to remember. Yeah, it'd be chapter 9, wasn't it? Yeah, in the Commons room, okay. It wasn't the hangar, the Commons room. So, lights out. And Trevor sees Lune make his way to the Commons room. He waits a few minutes and he makes his way in there as well. And we're told that technically the students shouldn't be out after night. They should be in their rooms. But it's Trevor's learned that it's a rule that isn't really enforced because there's such a crush of work. There's just so much. The workload is just so crushing that the patrols turn another eye. Turn an eye if they see a recruit out after I guess the curfew. Even though it's like late at night. Anyway, Trevor waits a few minutes and he makes his way into the commons room behind Lune, and he sits next to him at a console, and he says to Lune that they should explore the delivery points for food and materials. Then maybe there's a way out that way. And Lune says no. There was someone who tried that route, and they got put into They got sent to solitary for 2 weeks, and then he had to have a shadow like he does, which is pretty much just being followed. And Trevor asks what some of Lune's ideas, and Lune says the hangar. Tomorrow they have a piloting class there, and he says that they can steal a ship, and Trevor goes, steal a ship? Hey, that's a full moon idea. No problem. While Magus is teaching, we just hop in the cockpit and Lune just says, no, not while he's teaching. And he looks at Trevor, and he has quite a bit of intensity to him. And it's a spooky intensity. And Trevor gets the feeling that Lune could figure out how to break in and steal the ship. And Lune says, you always brag about cracking security systems. And Trevor says that, yes, you can steal the transport, no problem, and break into a warehouse. But they're talking about Imperial security here. And Lune says, every system has a flaw. You just have to find it. I heard that somewhere. And Trevor grins because he heard it from Lune. Because Lune heard it from him, and he had heard it from Ferris. I actually don't remember that, but it sounds somewhat familiar. And anyway, Trevor says that he has a couple half alpha charges. They can maybe blow down the doors, but he doesn't think that there'd be enough. It would be enough to blow down the doors, but they can try. And Lune says no, that's the last resort if he can't hotwire the ship, and they have to be able to go back to their quarters and wait for another chance. So Trevor asks how they're going to get into the hangar, and Lune says security codes from the classrooms and hangar are changed every 12 hours. Maggie's will have the codes for the hangar on his security card, since he's going to teach a class there first thing in the morning. The security card is clipped to his tunic, Trevor said. That's the first problem. The second one is that he's noticed it was gone in about 2 seconds flat. He needs that card to go just about anywhere. Lune held up the card. He doesn't need it while he's in the refresher. And that moment really got me laughing for a moment. Because of course Lune has the card. He explains, and Trevor says, you've got to be kidding me. You stole Maggie's card? And Lune says, every night Maggie takes a shower and then a long steam. He's in there for 45 minutes minimum. Plenty of time. And Trevor asks what they're waiting for, and they make their way over to the hangar, and they avoid the battle droids. They're quite easy to avoid, especially with Lune's possibility of enhanced steering. And they make their way to the first starship, which has a lowered ramp, and they get in there, and Trevor doesn't dare start the engines yet, but he quickly flips through the systems check. And he says he's going to have to override the security codes, and it might take a few minutes, and Lune urges him to hurry. And Trevor starts through the codes and he tries to break it, but it's more complicated than a standard security code, and he tries just about every trick he has, and he has to stop for a moment to try and think. And Lune warns Trevor to duck. And Lune ducks, and just in a moment, almost a moment too late, almost, he does it in time, but almost Trevor ducks, and the lights turn on, and footsteps are heard. And who comes into the hangar, and the ship, but Lieutenant Magus. And he finds him in the ship and he goes, "Imagine my surprise when I emerged from my relaxing steam to find my security cards gone. Imagine when I plugged into security and found I was actually in the hangar." And one of them says we were just, and Magus tells them to spare him the "we were just," because he's heard just about every single one ever invented. And he says to squirm out, and Magus backs up so they can get out, and he tells Ford Davinian to stay with him, and Thornton, who again is Trevor, to get back to his chamber and try not to break another rule or run into Kestrel. And Trevor blurts out without thinking that it was his idea and not to punish Lune. And Magus says he's not hearing this. And he says, "Any more degrees and you'll be sent to the solitary chamber." And that immediately quiets Trevor, because he can't help Lune if he's in the solitary chamber. And the stormtroopers marching, and Magus says to escort Thornton to his chamber and lock him in, and if he moves, stun him. And the troopers surround Trevor, and he has no choice to just go back to his chamber, and he throws Lune one last look as he leaves. It was a good plan. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out, but it was a good plan. There was quite a lot of funny moments in the planning stage. There were quite a lot of funny moments there, with, of course, Trevor, he's Trevor, he's got his remarks. You also have Lune just holding up the cards. Just have him holding up the cards. And that was, to me, that was hilarious. It just it's like, oh, of course he has the card. And it's like, oh, of course he has the card. Of course he's got it. But, just wasn't expecting it. We also learn a little bit about where the chambers are. I didn't go into detail about it because, again, that's not really relevant much to the story. It's just kind of like setting the scene. But we're told how all the first year recruits have chambers that are near each other, and how they're arranged, and how they're in the centre of the complex. And they're arranged in degrees, and every 10 rooms there is a commons room with with banks of consoles for research purposes. And Trevor can see a door to a commons room from his own chamber. But yeah, I didn't really talk through that because, again, not really relevant. So yeah. It's really going to be interesting and to see how they get out of this one. How is Lune and Trevor going to get out of this one? How are they going to get out of this one? It really feels like they're in a very sticky situation here. The next chapter is again focusing with Magus. I'm actually kind of curious to know what chapter 16 will be. Okay, we're going back to Ferguson for chapter 16. I guess. Still no more Hydra in 16, unfortunately, from what it looks like. But yeah. Anyway, it's really going to be interesting to see just how Trevor and Lune get out of this one. For Lune, I can kind of see how he might be able to get out, because again he has the Force, but Trevor, I can't. I don't know how he's going to get out. Is he just going to drop a few alpha charges? That won't really work if he's right there, really. Or if he's at the heart of the blast. It's going to be interesting to see just how they get out of this one. So yeah, I do find it. I know Obi-Wan is at the end of the book because I have seen the last page for a while, and I think he's telling Ferris to go to Alderaan. But you would think Obi-Wan would not be on the cover of the book if he only appears very briefly in the book. Yet he's on the cover here. It's probably just on there to, get more sales. But I find it funny that he's on the cover of the book, even though I'm fairly sure it's only there at the end of the book. I could be wrong on that. He maybe appear a little bit earlier, but I think it's only at the end. But I just find that funny. I just find it funny that he just so happens to be on the front cover of the book. Yeah. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 15 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. I've just gone back too far then. So, Magus is taking Lune, and for some reason, Lune isn't the one who is nervous. He's not the one who's nervous for some reason. But Magus is nervous, and Lune's confused at this, that Magus is nervous, and he's thinking, shouldn't I be the one who's nervous? He doesn't know whether it's a connection to the living force or not, but he's always been able to read emotions. He's always been aware of people's emotions. And it's one reason why he was always afraid of his father. He always knew that he was faking stuff. He always knew that he was pretending to be... He always pretending to be a husband, pretending to be a father, and Bog's real self leaks out no matter what. And Lune is always wonders, was it so wrong to not love your own father? And this is for the 1000th time he's wondering, and he hasn't asked his mother this yet. He just can't, because he's at that age where he's still too young to be given a proper answer. And his mom would say that Bog was confused or too ambitious, and he just thinks, no mom, Bog is a bad guy. Dad is a bad guy, sorry. And again, he's wondering why Magus is nervous. And he keeps looking back at Lune, and he thinks he's doing something he knows isn't right. And he asks where he's going, and he's now, and Lune is for the first time here, afraid. And Magus tells him in a not quite so mean way, surprisingly, to shut up. But it doesn't say it in a mean tone. It was more like Lune was reminding him of his own unease. Anyway, eventually a retractable roof opens, no idea where, maybe in the hangar, maybe somewhere else, where and Bog's the little air speeder flies down. And it's black, and it says it's a sleek black number with red chromium trim. Bog steps out, and Lune stops walking and says no. Magus says to Lune that you need to go with your father, Definion, and that he needs him, and he needs to follow, and Lune needs to follow orders, because remember, he has friends here, and you wouldn't want anything to happen to Thornton, was he? And Lune closes his mouth. He's sure Trevor can take care of himself, probably. And Magus says that, and if you don't go, who will your father be most angry at? And Lune says, you. And Magus says, no, your mother. And he says he blames her for everything, right? And he says he got that much after 10 minutes with him. He'll blame this on her too. And Lune knows that it's the truth, and it makes him feel trapped. And Bog is walking forwards with a fake smile, and Lune just sees that smile as a big empty hole, and he says, "Son, don't worry, I have good news. Take a ride with me, and I'll tell you about it." And Lune starts to feel quite a bit of dread, and he knows he's trapped. There's nowhere to go. He can't really get out, can he? So he gets into Bog's airspeed with Bog, and Magus says, "Let me know how," but Bog ignores him. And Bog's sitting in behind the controls, and the cockpit closes, and he seals Lune in, and he tells Lune to hang on, and he bought this after he became Imperial Governor, and it moves fast, and it shoots out into the Black Night. And he's looking at all the lights, and he's thinking that hopefully, and he's thinking about how all those lights represents one person's life, a quiet life. He's just hoping they aren't. And he's thinking they weren't at the mercy of someone else, or at least that's what he hoped. And again, we're told how in his training, Garen spoke to him about the living force, and how some Jedi were more connected with it than others, and he talked about Qui-Gon Jinn. And Garen said it says he had said that he felt a similar thing with Lune, that he could connect to the living force. If times were different, if he's been identified earlier, if the Clone Wars hadn't come along, he could have been at the temple too. And now the temple's rising up in front of them, and Lune can feel the dark side and all the lives that were killed there, and Bog loves to see fly past it. And they make their way over to the Senate complex and over to a tower, which is the Empire Industry, which is the Empire Recon. What was it? The Empire Sue Recon. And he says, and they land, and he says, "Don't look so nervous. This is your moment, Looney." And we're told Lune hates it being called Looney. It was the nickname his father gave him, and he hates it. He absolutely hates it. He's told his father that multiple times, but he just doesn't listen. Sorry about that. Give me a moment. So again, he hates being called Looney. And then Bog leans in closer, and he says, "You get this. This is your big chance. I arranged it. Why do I bother, you ask? Because I'm your dad. Simple as that." And they exit the airspeed and make their way into the room, and Lune immediately smells medicine and cleaner, and he knows and he knows now that they're in a hospital. And Bog says this is where the Emperor's friends come for treatment, and it's an honour to be chosen for this, and do you understand? And Lune doesn't understand. He just knows that he's in big trouble. Anyway, then we have a little bit of a time, I guess. Then we kind of have a cutaway, and we're told that Lune is going under examinations. And Bog's gone to meet with Jenna Zan Arbor and Vader. And Vader is amazed that Bog Davinian's child has a forced connection, and he thinks it must have come from Master Yoda, because Bog wore stupidity like a hat. And Bog hustles his way in, and again, Sano, and we're told how Sano Solo had told Vader that Bog's volunteered his son for this, which he did. And Vader doesn't really care who Zan Arbor will use for a project, for a subject, so he just allowed it. And he thinks that no doubt Bog would think this would make him gain points for Lune's participation, but it's just only fuels Vader's contempt. And Bog says that seems to be very proud of his son, and lies and says how when my son learns the Empire needs his help, he stepped up. And he didn't hesitate a moment, and he asks that, and he requests that now that he's here, he'd like to know what the project is. And Jenna Zan Arbor looks at Vader and asks if he signed a release, and Vader says not yet. And this really infuriates Jenna, and she just says, "Can I proceed without it? I don't have time for difficult parents." And Bog says, "Now who are you calling difficult? I'm easy." Oh, I wouldn't really call Bug easy. I don't think any of us would. But he then goes on to say, but I guess I have to point out, because maybe you don't know, but I'm an Imperial Governor. Just want to make that clear. I've got clearance. Maybe more than you. And Sana Arbor sizes him up and says she doubts it. And again, Bog asks what the project is, and he thinks he deserves to be in the laser loop, as he says. And Vader is having to control this irritation because Bog's making demands, and he thinks Bog's self-importance will have to be checked, but not yet, and not here, and because he needs Lune. And Vader introduces Jenna as Dr. Zan Arbor and says that she's doing a series of tests on memory, and Bog says that's all, and he gets a bit relieved, and then he asks further questions, asking what she will exactly do. And San Arbor says that she will pinpoint certain areas of the brain and target specifically the memory for elimination. And Bog swallows and says, elimination? What does that mean exactly? And I think even us would have picked up on, what elimination would mean. But she says, well, obviously, some memories that the child has will disappear, as if they had never existed. Just inconsequential ones. Naturally, I'll just take random memories from different time frames. He'll never know what's missing. Bog says, wait a second here, I didn't know this. And he didn't know that his brain would be involved, and he says brains are important. And Jenna just rolls her eyes, and Vader shoots her a look. And again it says that Bog was an idiot, but he could make trouble. And Vader turns to Bog and says that they all have memories that they might wish to obliterate, even a child, especially a child. And he says that he could give direction to Zan Arbor. And Zan Arbor understood his meaning immediately and targeting something big. And she says that would be helpful. And Bog booms that his boy is not an experiment. But Vader isn't about to stop, and Vader is again being manipulative, and he says it is to help Lune, and that maybe he has memories that could be painful, and he says memories of his mother, for example, and he watches as Bog recoils, and then of course Bog's greed takes over, and it's his greed for control and control of his son, and he licks his lip and he says he could pinpoint that area. And Jenna says that if she gives him the time frame, yes. And we get a bit of a point of view from Vader. Again, he doesn't particularly care if Bog gives permission or not, but he thinks it'll be easier if he does. And he thinks on second thought, Lune's the perfect subject, because even though he's not a trained Force user, he is still connected to the Force, and if the Force has any kind of interference, then with what's being done, it will then they can work around those complications. And Bog lets Sana. I keep saying Sana. That's Bane's apprentice. Jenna take his retinal print and to authorise the procedure, and then the scientist leaves, and Bog, and then the scientist leaves. Bog then goes to the examination room where Lune is, and Vader says to Bog he can go now, and you'll tell him when it's time to pick Lune up. And Bog's upset he can't wait, but he knows better than to argue, and Vader makes his way towards the inner core of the tower. And again, we're told how if this was successful, it would end his torment. And we're told how it's unsettling being in the place where he was told about what had happened to Padme, and the place where he got reconstructed after his loss to Obi-Wan. But he's told that yet there was compensation here. Sith crystals and artifacts that would restore him, and there was hope here now. Hope for the end of Padme at last. And that's where we end off the chapter. It's interesting that Maggis was the one who was nervous. I find it interesting that, especially because he's such a serious character, you know, it's interesting that he was the one who was nervous. And you know, they talk about how emotion that's not allowed here in the Empire. Yeah, I think he still has a little bit of sympathy. I think you can still kind of tell he has a little bit of sympathy there. There's a little bit of sympathy there, and I think you can kind of tell that he's got a bit of sympathy. Bog, he really is a bad father. But even as bad as a father as he is, you know, he still has some concern for his son, you know. He still has some concern. But of course his greed eventually just takes over. His greed eventually just takes over. I think, how is Lune gonna get out of this? And how are they going? How is like the erased or Astri? You know, how are they gonna learn that? Oh, Lune's no longer in the academy. How's Trevor gonna tell them that? You know, so this is just really this is really in a sticky situation here. And we've only got 5 more chapters, so yeah. The next chapter's about Ferris, and I know the last chapter features Ferris, so you know that's not a lot to work with. We've still got a bunch of stuff like with and we've still got a bunch of stuff with Clive and with Flame. You know, I'm fairly sure Keats really appears at some point in this book. So I guess that means something with the arrays. You know, so we've still got got that to continue on with the storyline of the memory. So we've got lots in this book. We've got loads. So we also got Hydra. You know, with the search. So yeah. And there's so much that still needs to be put into these last couple of chapters. Sorry, I just accidentally ended the recording there. There's so much that still needs to be put into the these last couple of chapters. So yeah, but yeah, thank you all for watching. You know what I'm gonna say. Goodbye. Hello everyone. So I have just read chapter 16 of The Last of the Jedi Against the Empire. So Ferris he's checked the blueprints and he's found out the top room, one of the top, I assume it's the top room. Yeah, again he's looked into the blueprints and he's done a visual surveillance of the Empire building, Med Center, using the server circles the building and some judicious fall sleeps. And the windowed gallery at the top of the building, now at the top of the tower, was just for show. As it wasn't a storage area like the blueprints would have led you to believe. It only looks that way. And we're told how Ferris had used a false technique called thoughtful looking. I'm just going to read off its description here. It involves shifting one's concentration back and forth, from the big picture to the microscopic. The methods often helped a Jedi to be able to see things that even electro-binoculars didn't pick up. Ferris had seen the tiniest flaw on the metallic skin surface of the high levels of the tower. And we're told how it had probably been hit by some stray debris. Just a slight glancing blow, but it was enough to allow Ferris to realise that it's actually armouring, not the skin of the tower. And once he's seen that, he continued his inspection until he found what he was looking for: slight bumps that were regularly spaced, and that indicated power feed lines, and they were enough lines to supply a turbo laser. And he's wondering why a storage area needed a blast protection as well as offensive weapons, and he thinks he has to get in there. And we're told that the facility's quiet now. It's like the quiet. I guess it's like the quietest hour of the med facility, because the patients are in for the night with only regularly timed checks by the med droids. And Mallory gave Ferris the schedule. anyway, Ferris walks through the walls and hops on holes, sorry, and walks on a turbo lift. He makes his way to the topmost floor. Now, this turbo lift can't get to the topmost floor in that storage area, but it is able. But there is another turbo lift used, but there is another service turbo lift used by the Medroids. That has a way of access for work that has worker access. And it has no, in fairness, there's no doubt it has worker access to allow events, to allow people to get in there in the events of repairs or breakdown. And as he's making his way through the turbo lift, up to the turbo lift, he jumps up on top and he has to balance on the speeding lift, and the numbers are just a blur, and he's racing all the way up to the top, and so he has to time this perfectly to get through that little hatch to the other turbo lift. Because if he doesn't time it perfectly, it says he's going to be squashed to Jedi jam. And he thinks that he has to call on the Force, time needed to slow down, and everything needs to be clear, and he needs perfect timing, and he says, and luck would be good, and he thinks not luck, because a Jedi doesn't need luck. And you can see the little opening to the parallel shafts that are the Med one, the service one, and he has to have perfect accuracy and timing because it's so small. And if he doesn't fit through it in time, if he doesn't time it just right and get through it just right, he's going to be turned into Jedi jam. And Ferris tells him smart to shut up and let the Force work, and he thinks there's no room for doubt. And he leaps, makes it through with only centimetres to spare, and he looks up and sees that the turbo lift, it's above him. He can't use that to land. But he looks ahead and he sees some power cables, I think it was it? But on the other wall, it says, but on the other wall of the shaft, he saw a power line cable bolted into the wall, bolts big enough for handholds, and he flies across and grabs the handholds, and he starts making his way up the shaft, until he gets to the floor he wants to. I guess it's near the topmost. And he finds the door he's looking for, and it's a bit of a squeeze, but he can make it, and he activates the turbo lift sensor on the outside to open the door, and he's thankful that was, because he doesn't want to leave evidence of a break-in. And he makes his way into a dark room. Again, he wants to return to his life as a double agent, but he makes his way into the dark room, and he can feel the dark side of the Force surge suddenly. And it says the Medroids are charging the sensor, and immediately, Ferris walks past the Medroids towards an archway, and beyond it there's a corridor that leads upwards toward the interior of the Ram Tower. And immediately his senses are on alert, because he senses the living Force. There's someone here, there's activity, there's talking, and he has to drown out all the sounds to figure it out. And he creeps forward and risks a peek through a surveillance window, and he sees Jenna Zanarbor there, and he wonders what she's up to, and he's not surprised to see her because she's working for the Empire. And we're told about how during the Republic she'd been a most wanted criminal, and how she introduced terrible viruses into populations and offered her own vaccines to cure them, and she made a fortune through that. And in Ferris's very last mission, she was seen trying to contact the Sith Lord on Korriban, and he wasn't surprised to see that she's with the Empire, and it's attracts beings like her. And he tries to sit her around to try and see who she's talking to, and he knows someone is sitting on the examining table while she's entering data into her medboard. And again, he thinks he's here to investigate Zanarbor. He's here to investigate Vader, not track Zanarbor's next experiment, and he should keep going. He has no way of, and because, he has less than an hour to do this until the shift ends and his security card becomes invalid. And so he has no way of knowing when the place will come alive in the morning, if the place will come alive with morning, and until then anything could happen. Jaco could wake up, a request from Medinfo could come in, a random patrol could snag him, and he just needs to keep going, and he can't save every being, he had to choose his battles, and he turns away from the door, sensing only the dark side. And that's where we end off the chapter. It's such a chapter, because it's Lune's right there. He's right there. It's like it was a bit of a confusing chapter to follow. It was a bit of a struggle to follow this chapter. I'm going to admit that it was a bit of a struggle to follow it, and it could, I think, it was one of those chapters where it was a bit difficult to try and figure out what's being said, and it was having to, and that, for me personally, I had to keep rereading little bits to try and get the picture again, because it just wasn't making a whole lot of sense to me, and I think it could have been better phrased, like with the whole scenes of Ferris making his way. I think it could have been phrased a lot better, but you know, it is what it is. Again, interesting that they're hiding that there is no storage room there, and that it's just it's just a gallery that's meant to give it the appearance of a storage room, and that it's there's presumably a turbo laser up there, so it's interesting to see what Ferris is going to find, and I'm going to be curious as to whether that is actually the operating room where Vader was created, you know, where he got the armour, and if that's why. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this is all leading to, because even with this chapter explaining, it still feels a bit confusing. I think so far this has been probably the most confusing chapter in the entire series. It just doesn't, to me at least, it just doesn't make... It's struggling to make a bit of sense to me. It's struggling to make bits of sense, but you can kind of... It's not so confusing where you can't follow. You can still follow it, but I was struggling a little bit with this chapter. I was struggling to follow this chapter quite a bit. So, yeah. Also, at least Ferris didn't get squished, didn't get smushed to Jedi Jam. But yeah, it's nice to also, because how many times am I going to say this when reading this series? I've gone quite a few chapters without mentioning it. I haven't read Jedi Quest. So it's nice to get a bit more background to Jenna Zanarbor, and again, that's one thing Jude Watson does very well. If you don't know a character because you haven't read that series, or you know, if you forgot about what that character's relevance is, she explains who that character is, what they're about, which is really good, because it doesn't leave you feeling like you're in the dark because you haven't read the previous 30 books. You know, you're told who they are, what they're about, and that's about, and yeah, and it gives you just enough information to the way you're on the same page, but if you read the previous books, you'd have even more information, and it may make even more sense. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So yeah, Jude Watson really does good when it comes to giving enough information about a character, even if it's sometimes, you know, with Jenna it's been maybe a bit too, you know, she was mentioned last book. It's only really now we get told what she's about, really, and we all, you know, this is in the fourth quarter of the book, and we're only now being told what Jenna is, what she's about. I think it probably should have been made clearer as to what she was about when she was mentioned in Secret Weapon, rather than here. I think that's maybe just my one criticism, because again with Jenna Zanarbor, she was mentioned last book. I had no idea who she was, what she was about, because again I haven't read Jedi Quest, and it's just a bit but with her getting mentioned again here, it makes it clear that, oh right, she's been brought on to oversee some of the stuff with the weapons delivery systems. Because he had seen secret documents for a large-scale weapons delivery system with her name on it. So, yeah, again, it's good enough to the point where it's, oh, okay, yeah, I'm with you now when you look back at Secret Weapon, with that lie making it clear as to who she is, what she's about. But again, it could be made clearer in Secret Weapon. I think it should just be mentioned in Secret Weapon, like who she is, what she's about. Or if it had to be mentioned in this book, mention it when she first appeared, rather than now. In the third chapter, in the fourth quarter of the book. It just feels maybe a little bit too late to start telling the Sushi what it is and what she's about. But it's at least we got to be told with that. It just feels like it came in maybe a bit too late. So yeah, I do not assume we're going to be seeing any more Hydra, given the point of the book we're in now. So, I know we're going to see more of Hydra in Master of Deception and Reckoning. I'm not sure how much more though, given she's about one chapter of this book. She had 2 brief mentions in last book. She's unlike Malorum, where he has a fairly massive presence. Hydra is not as big as a presence. Hydra's nowhere near as much of a presence. Again, Dark Warning, even though Malorum didn't appear in Dark Warning, you could still feel his shadow over the story. And you still had Sankor in there, who was an Inquisitor, to satisfy our Inquisitor needs. But yeah, it just feels a bit like Sankor, is quite relevant to the story. Malorum is quite relevant to the story. Hydra, she just doesn't quite feel as relevant to the story. And maybe that's just how I'm seeing it, though. Hopefully we'll get more of Hydra in the next couple books. Next 2 books. And that's someone I am looking for. That's so good. Because again, I made it clear before, I was reading these books because it features Inquisitors, and I like the Inquisitors. But, Ferrus, Keats, Trevor, they've all made their way to be some of my favourite characters. So, yeah. I think that brings an end to this review. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.